I am going to provide some basic information about exchange rates in this module. We're going to talk about the way in which exchange rates are set in the market and by government policy. We're going to look at some of the rules of exchange rates, and then we're going to go on to our question dealing with the Chinese renminbi, Brazil real, and US dollar, and how those have related over time, and that will be our assignment for this coming week. Exchange rates indicate how much of one country's currency can be gained for another currency, and there's a very large market in exchange rates, and it's traded on $1.2 trillion per day. And just to give you an example, I'm showing the Euro US dollar exchange rate over to the right on the blue. The euro, if you're going to Europe, you're going to use the euro as an exchange or as a currency. If you're in the US dollar, you use the US dollar. And if you're an American citizen, you're going to go and buy euros and then travel in Europe. Euro to US dollar exchange rate is, as you can see here, is indicated by euro over or divided by US dollar. In our case here, the euro US dollar exchange rate is 1.24. That will mean that 1 euro will buy 1.24 US dollar. Note that it isn't 1.24 euro will buy 1 US dollar. The euro slash USD is equal to 1.24. That means that 1 euro will be $1.24. That may be a bit confusing because if you look at the division side, you would think 1.24 divided by 1 gives you 1.24. It doesn't work that way in exchange rates. The most widely traded currencies are listed on this slide: US dollar, euro, Japanese yen, British pound, Swiss franc, Canadian dollar. Those all make sense in terms of the size of the economy. And again, if you're looking at the currency market, these are some of the largest traded currencies. This graph gives you a feel for the size of the currencies that are traded. You'll note that the US dollar is by far and away the largest currency traded. Again, US has the distinction of being known as the reserve currency at this point, so many currencies go through the US dollar. This slide shows the largest economies in the world. You can see there that list includes US, China, US 19 trillion, China 11.9 trillion, Japan, Germany, France, UK, and India. Next to those economies, I put a blue arrow, and that blue arrow indicates that their countries' currencies are some of the largest traded. You'll see there's blue arrows next to US, Japan. Germany and France are combined as they go under the euro. UK. So all of those have a blue lines, and one of the things that I want you to note is that one country, China, now indicated by the red lines, is not amongst the largest traded currencies in the world. We're going to go and describe that now because of their currency regime. Two polar opposite ways countries can control their exchange rate is to have it fixed or floating market. In a fixed exchange rate regime, the country tries to tie their currency to another currency. Most often that's the US dollar, sometimes the euro or Japanese yen, and sometimes a basket of currency. The peg country, or the country that's trying to peg it, will say we want our exchange rate to be, for example, 0.64. They will then take actions to cause that exchange rate to maintain in that 0.64 area. The other way is to have the floating market determine that exchange rate, and most major currencies are set by supply and demand conditions. That is, the country allows the market to determine the exchange rate. Another regime is called a managed float or a dirty float. Sort of manage it within range, and that is that the country will say we want to keep the exchange rate within range. It won't be necessarily pegged to a number, but we're going to allow it to float somewhat. If you want more information on this type of regimes, go into currency exchange, and I listed a Infestobia article there that provides some very good background. The Chinese currency, the renminbi, is a managed float or a dirty float, and here you see an article listed. This is on our website as well. You can go to that website and look at that article. But if you're looking at that article, here's what that will say, the very first paragraph. China's current exchange rate regime is a hybrid of fixed and floating. It was purely a fixed regime from 1994 to 2005, with the yuan pegged to the US dollar at approximately 8.28. In July 2005, Beijing announced it would revalue the yuan and peg it to a basket. The weights of each have never been announced, and the reform created what expert Wayne Morrison calls a managed float. And this managed float is sometimes very controversial amongst U.S. policymakers and those concerned about trade with the Chinese. For those currencies that are floating, there is an active market. Actually, the currency market is one of the largest financial markets in the world. A lot of trading going on. Here is an example of a report from the Wall Street Journal on the currency market. It's in their market overview section. And over on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see the currency traded pairs, and I'm going to highlight the euro. So this would be the euro US dollar exchange rate. When I took this screenshot, the euro to US dollar exchange rate was 1.2301. Again, that can change greatly from day to day to day. I'm going to now focus on the key currency cross rate box that you see on the right hand side of your screen. I've now highlighted that. We're going to take that box and isolate it and talk about some of the relationships between those currency cross rates. Here is that cross rate box isolated, and I'm going to talk about two rules. The first is the reciprocal rule, and this is that the euro to US dollar will equal the US dollar to euro. All right, let's just give a specific example here, and you could do that obviously with any country's exchange rates. Here I've highlighted two cross-country exchange rates. Euro US dollar 1.2301, which means that 1 euro will get 1.2301 US dollar. It's the same one I highlighted in the previous Wall Street Journal article slide with the rates listed on the left hand side of the screen. The other one is the US dollar euro, USD euro, and it's 0.8130. 1 US dollar will get 0.8130 euros. Those currency pairs have a relationship, and they're reciprocal of one another. The 1.2301 and 0.8130 are related, and in fact the 0.8130 equals 1 divided by 1.2301 and vice versa. And this should be obvious. You state the reciprocal of one another when you're talking about the other exchange rates. Now, there are some issues with rounding. As you can see here, that 0.812940 is not exactly equal to 0.8130, but that is simply due to rounding. The other rule is an arbitrage condition, and basically the arbitrage condition is that you can't transfer money from one country's currency to another and bring it back and make money. And that makes sense. There's a market out there, and if that existed, people would do it and make money at it and force the currencies back towards one another. The arbitrage rule is simply this. Take two countries' exchange rates, A over C, and that will equal A over B, B over C. So we took money from A, moved it to B, moved B to C, and you shouldn't be able to make money at it. If you want to look at it from a mathematical point of view, the B's cancel. Let's give a specific example here. US dollar to Canadian dollar. 1 US dollar will get 1.2885 Canadian dollars. Now let's take two other exchange rates. US dollar to euro, 0.8130. Euro to Canadian dollar, 1.548. If I multiply or transfer US dollar to euro, euro to Canadian, do the math, 0.8130, 1.5848, it will pretty closely equal the US dollar to Canadian dollar exchange rate. Again, that's an arbitrage condition, and it causes all of those exchange rates and currency cross rates to bear a relationship to one another. Over time, those exchange rates are going to vary, and generally we describe those as strengthening and weakening. And here I'm going to give an example between euro and US dollar. Listed the euro US dollar exchange rate first as 1.2 US. 1 euro will buy 1.2 US dollars, and then it moves to 1.1. Euro to US dollar, 1.2 to 1.1. In this case, the euro has weakened relative to the US dollar. The euro will buy less than dollars. That also means that the US dollar has strengthened. They have to work opposite one another. So what does that mean? Again, the US dollar has strengthened, euro has weakened. That will mean that European goods cost less to Americans, and that is good for imports from Europe to the United States. It also means that U.S. goods will cost more to Europeans. It's bad for exports from U.S. to Europe. They have the opposite effects. So you can see here when we're talking about trade, and if you get concerned about trade flows, the exchange rate and where it was moving will have impacts and concerns. Here's an example of a weakening US dollar relative to the euro, which also means the euro is strengthening. Here's the example. Euro went from 1.2 to 1.3. Exchange rates over time can be graphed, and I'm going to show you now 3 US dollar exchange rates. Here you're seeing the US dollar to euro. We'll talk about these in class. Here you can see that it's varied over time, and as we look at those exchange rate, as the exchange rate goes down, the US dollar is weakening relative to the euro. Here's the US dollar relative to the Brazilian currency, the Brazilian real. As you can see, the US dollar has strengthened over time relative to the Brazilian currency. Here is the US dollar relative to the Chinese currency, and I want you to note that flat period from 1995 through 2004. Remember our discussion earlier in this module? China had maintained a fixed pegged exchange rate during that period, and since then it's been more managed, but you can see it hasn't varied a lot. And again, it's now a dirty float, but you can see China's currency has been more controlled than either the Brazilian currency or the euro relative to the US dollar. For review, know the two rules, the reciprocity rule and the arbitrage condition. So I'll guarantee you I'll give you A currency rates AB, CB, and you calculate AC. I'll also ask you about strengthening and weakening of the currency relative to one another and what that will do to imports and exports. Finally, our assignment this week is going to deal with the relative trade position of the U.S.-Brazil. We're going to give you data on Brazilian exchange rate relative to the U.S. dollar, China's exchange rate relative to the U.S. dollar, and then we're going to talk about how that has impacted trade between our 3 countries.